Debt has piled up to levels which are simply impossible for Greece to ever pay back, and this could very well lead to bank runs, capital controls, and civil unrest. You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. We'll get into this today. We'll discuss exactly how what's occurring in Greece right now could very well come to your doorstep. Let's begin with this article here talking about the ECB, the European Central Bank, raised the level of emergency funding for Greek banks. What this is simply a real critical situation where they are unable to have enough money in their banking system to operate. So different institutions, whether today it's the IMF, tomorrow it's the EU or the Bank of Greece or whatever, doesn't matter. It's all basically not even plugging up the hole. They're simply pumping in blood from a different area. And of course, they suggest that there's no problem with financing the Greek banks. It's quite a joke the way that they talk about this here, because we know specifically that there is such a huge problem, and they always lie and make it a bold statement because people will simply believe it. There's more information in the article, but I want to move on, so much to cover as we look at the Greek officials meeting and preparing for proposals for this Eurozone summit. And all I wanted to know from this is that they are ready to discuss and they want to make an agreement. That's actually what they said here. We aim at an agreement on Monday. Monday is a huge day, depending on when you are watching this. I'm posting this in the Eastern time zone on Sunday, but perhaps it's actually past that point now. But the information still remains valid. Watch as I discuss the next few articles here. As we look at Russia and what they were willing to do. Now, if we get into this here, Russian President Vladimir Putin said that talks with Greek Prime Minister that a prospective Russian natural gas pipeline should help Greece service its debt. Very, very important here that they want to do business. And this is very interesting that what Putin said here. If the EU wants to pay its debts, it should be interested in growing the Greek immunity, helping it pay its debts. The EU should be applauding us. What's wrong with creating jobs in Greece? And surely there's nothing wrong with that. That's why the Prime Minister of Greece is heading out there trying to do deals with anybody who will simply make this work for them. Lots more in this article as well. That's all I wanted to note, however. And look at this. We have a situation where definitely the fund managers of the world are always putting a focus, putting an emphasis on paper assets. In fact, if you want to be well diversified, according to them, you need to own all of the asset classes, and all of them happen to be paper, according to them. So it's quite funny when they talk about investing in real estate, they're talking about owning real estate stocks or maybe REITs. And then you talk about their precious metals investments. Maybe they'll own some mining or maybe something else, but never the physical anything else. It's always paper. But now one of the biggest bond funds in Britain urged investors to keep cash under the mattress. This article is out of the Telegraph. Ian Spreadbury, who invests more than $4 billion of investors' money across a handful of bond funds for Fidelity, saying that he's concerned about a systemic event. Okay, hold your thoughts on that one for a moment. Could rock markets, possibly similar to the magnitude of the financial crisis of 2008, which began in Britain with a Northern Rock run. That's a bank run. So let's just read the next line before I give my opinion here. Systemic risk is in the system, and as an investor, you have to be aware of that. So when I talk about the global economic collapse, when I use the word collapse or crisis or financial crisis part 2, remember that it isn't just me saying this. This individual here investing $4 billion worth also is worried about the same events occurring. He's quoted saying a systemic event, systemic risk. Very important to note this. And look at what he says further down in the article. He says that they have to spread their money widely. What do I always say? Every different asset class. It's what I wrote about in my book, and still to this day talking about that. I don't just talk about investing in precious metals or just in real estate or just in businesses or what have you. You need everything. That's the only way you'll ever be truly diversified. He said it includes some gold and silver as well as cash inside savings accounts, but also said hold on to the physical cash too. This individual knows exactly what's coming down the pike. This is extremely important to note that when a person this big is telling you to hold on to physical cash, you rarely ever hear of this type of deal, investing in gold and silver. Very important. Let's move on to what I wrote about in my book. This individual here knows what I'm about to share, and I'm sure most of you do too, but I just wanted to illustrate the point. As we take this $100, proverbial $100 bill, as we look at certain dates here, as the 1900s, that would have bought you a car, in 1950 perhaps a motorcycle, and now today in the 2000s it can buy us a bus pass. And what does that tell us about the value of money? That it declines. But when this individual says you want to own some cash because the situation is getting critical, you know that something deep in the system is going to be shaken right here. So this is critical. I agree with the fact that you should own some physical cash. There's no need to have everything you've ever earned inside of precious metals, for example. You want to have some of everything. That's very important. You want to have a bank account, perhaps, where you get your 9-to-5 job, where they pay you, where you need to pay the bills and everything else. But you don't want to keep your savings in there. Perhaps you want to have a little cash on hand. You want a little, perhaps you own a piece of land. Perhaps you have some precious metals on hand. Whatever it is, you want to be as diversified as possible. That is very critical, more now than literally ever before in history based on my research. Look at this. We're talking about the last days of Pompeii. This is the one big article that I really wanted to get to. I want to touch on a few points from here. I'll move on very quickly and let's just get into it. What could happen in the coming days is the macroeconomic version of an avalanche. Worst case scenario to begin with a run on the banks, just as I've said, forcing the government to impose capital controls and restrict all withdrawals. Okay, this is out of the Telegraph, but remember that I've been telling you this wholeheartedly, consistently now for years, wrote about it in my book. I am on record saying that this will occur, this type of information. All right, I just wanted to note a few things, that the landslide may have already tumbled down the mountain slide. They have to, the Greeks basically have withdrawn so much of their bank account. In this case here, they're just quoting the number 1.5 billion euro from their accounts. This is getting worse and worse, spiraling out of control, as they say. The ECB has this emergency injection that they put into the system so that the banks stay open on Monday. But what about Tuesday, they're asking? Well, of course, you can't just keep pumping money into the system, even though it's billions of dollars. This is how serious this gets. Look at this. Friday alone, that number, 1.5 billion. And let's move on to the last point here. The next stage of the avalanche, having to repay 1.5 billion euro to the IMF. But you have 1.5 billion euro leaving in a single day. So they simply cannot pay this back. They have to pay the IMF by June 30th. What if they can't pay it back? Well, a former default could make Greece's membership of the euro and perhaps even the European Union impossible to sustain. They are now referring to this as the Grexit. The Greek exit from the EU, this would be unbelievably terrible for this short period of time. We would definitely see everything that I discussed at the beginning of the video, where we have the bank runs, where we have the capital controls afterwards, and then of course the civil unrest. This is it for this article. I just wanted to move on to a couple other points that I wanted to make, which are not being, the dots are not being connected within the mainstream media, and I would say about 99% of the alternative news as well. Why aren't people talking about this? Thousands marched in central London Saturday to protest against the British government austerity programs and spending cuts in a massive show of force meant to win attention to the plight of the poor. We have people on the streets and they're upset. For what reason? There are different reasons every day, but people are not happy with the conditions that they are currently living in. What city am I talking about? What state? What province? What municipality? What country? What territory? What continent? I'm talking about everywhere. We're all under the same umbrella. There is something called the G20, the G8, the G7. We have NATO. We have the EU. We have the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We have all of these different treaties, different alliances and unions and everything. And for just 1 second, if you believe that we're not all controlled by the same set of elite, all working above all of these governments, simply working as puppet masters, controlling all of the heads of states, then you have something else coming. Let's move on to this last article. The very serious information. What I'm talking about here today, and nobody else seems to be talking about it, 750,000 over 55s have seen their retirement funds plunge in recent weeks because the pension funds are investing using methods that predate the reforms introduced in April. Now, this right here, not so significant in the last part there, but what we have is basically a squandering of the pension funds in a way. Our investigations, that's the Telegraphs, have shed the light on an investment practice which is costing savers over £1 billion, or 9% of their individual pots. You can get into the details of what they're talking about here. What I'm talking about is the pension funds being squandered away in one way, shape, or form. Look at what's happened in Detroit. I talked about it in Portugal as well. It's being done all around the world. People rely on their pension funds. People rely on their retirement accounts. But what if that day when you need that money, or your neighbor needs that money, or your family needs that money, and it's not there? Guess what's going to happen? You're going to have riots. You are going to have the shelves, the store shelves emptying, and people are going to be upset. This is going to cause a massive level of civil unrest if it's not already occurring. There's going to be chaos in the streets. Mark my words, if things do not settle down now, it's going to get worse. If you found this video informative, please give me a thumbs up. And last but not least, if you found the video informative, I know you'll find my book, The Money GPS, even more informative. And you can actually flip through the book at the Amazon page for that. If you go over to Amazon, they have a look inside feature, and you can flip through the book and see if you like it for yourself. Take care.